Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for being here for one of Resource Central's Waterwise Yard webinar, introducing the DIY Landscape Transformation Guide. So this is a bit of a unique webinar that we've got here tonight. We're really excited to be here. So thanks so much for joining us. The purpose of this webinar is going to be to discuss and introduce this new resource that was created in partnership with Resource Central, Colorado Water Conservation Board, Denver Water, and importantly with support from Brown and Caldwell in order to help Coloradans complete a DIY Waterwise landscape project. So my name is Colbert. I am the Senior Program Coordinator for Resource Central's Garden in a Box program. And tonight, here also are Jenna Battson with Colorado Water Conservation Board and Stratton with Denver Water. So I'll turn it over to them shortly to introduce themselves more in depth, but first wanted to go into a few housekeeping items and go over the agenda before we jump in more detail. So to just go over some logistics, the seminar, like you saw, is being recorded, and we'll be sure to share the link to the recording with you in the coming days. And so if you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can use the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen, and we'll plan to address questions at the end of the presentation, primarily in kind of a live format, focusing primarily in that section, the questions that are relevant to the majority of listeners. That said, though, definitely send in questions using the Q&A button as you have them. As we have time kind of throughout, one of us may pop into that Q&A kind of section and answer the questions and type them in as you have them in case they're a little bit more kind of personal to your situation. So send them in as you've got them, but we will kind of have question break at the end. And then lastly, just a heads up that at the end of tonight's webinar, when you exit, a survey link is going to pop up. And so if you have a moment to fill that out then, that would be fantastic. If not, keep an eye out in the next few days, again, for that email from us with the link with the recording, and then also a link to the survey as well. So any and all feedback is really, really helpful for us as we kind of bring back these seminars each year and make sure there's as engaging, as relevant as possible. And then lastly, but definitely not least, a big thank you to the City of Westminster, who is sponsoring tonight's webinar, for their support also of our other Resource Central water conservation programs over the years. That includes Garden in a Box, the Lawn Replacement Program, the seminar series, and Slow the Flow. So thanks so much. Awesome. Alrighty, so to go over the plan for the webinar this evening briefly, just wanted to kind of start with touching on the purpose and the goal of this webinar, what it is, and then also what it won't necessarily cover. And then, as I mentioned, I'll turn it over here soon to Jenna and then B to introduce themselves and provide some context on why each of our organizations kind of joined up on creating this guide together. And then we'll jump into an introduction of the guide itself, diving into the chapters of the guide in more detail to help orient you when you're using it to find specific information. And then lastly, we'll chat about opportunities you'll have to learn more, additional assets that are going to come kind of a little bit later on related to the guide, and then steps planned for other supporting educational resources. So great. And then next up, so to touch on the goal of this webinar, just to kind of set expectations and make sure we're on the same page, since again, it is a little bit different from kind of the other webinars that we've had with Resource Central. So, and we'll continue to have this season. So firstly, just wanted to mention that this webinar is somewhat of a celebration of the fact that this guide is now complete and out in the world. We're really excited. The three of us plus some other folks at our organizations have been working on putting this guide together for a little over a year now. And so we're really thrilled to have seen it all come together in such a helpful and free tool for Coloradoans. So part of the completion of this guide is, of course, hosting this webinar. And we wanted to do so to provide a little bit more context and backstory about who created it, why it was created, what we hope to accomplish in its creation, and then again, what we kind of see as some next steps or additional outcomes that will follow this guide being publicly available. So we also wanted to hold this webinar specifically as part of Resource Central's ongoing Waterwise Yard seminar series as a way to really highlight that Resource Central, Denver Water, and CWCB, we're all really dedicated to providing Coloradans with educational tools and resources that aid in completing these Waterwise landscape projects. So we know that they can be somewhat daunting, and we really want to make sure we're kind of staying on top of what educational resources can be the most helpful. So, of course, as you know, these webinars are a great way to learn from from experts rather, about aspects of a Waterwise landscaping project by logging onto your computer at 6:30, to deep dive into a topic like irrigation or trees. And then so this guide is just another way to learn about these projects. So it's a tangible resource that you can come back to in order to kind of help complete your own project. And so that's all to say, this webinar is not going to teach or walk through the steps of completing a DIY Waterwise landscaping project. That's, of course, what the guide itself is for. We're just, again, here to orient you to kind of the information behind why it was created, and go over what all is in the guide to kind of use it on your own time. So thanks for kind of listening to that. We're excited to be here. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jenna to introduce herself and talk a little bit more about the Colorado Water Conservation Board.
Thanks, Allie. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Jenna Battson. I am the Outdoor Water Conservation Coordinator with the Colorado Water Conservation Board, or CWCB, and just wanted to provide some background information on what we do. CWCB is a non-regulatory water policy state government agency that is housed within the Department of Natural Resources. We have a mission to conserve, develop, protect, and manage Colorado's water for present and future generations. So we're Colorado's most comprehensive water information resource, and we provide a broad range of programs and technical and financial assistance to help support the Colorado Water Plan. The CWCB adopted the current Colorado Water Plan in January of 2023, and it really serves as this framework for statewide collaboration around water planning, all things water planning. So it really helps to guide, also future decision making, supports local actions to address water challenges with a really collaborative and balanced approach that is also solution oriented, that can help build resilience. So the water plan includes actions in 4 main focus areas that work together for a stronger state. So we have vibrant communities, robust agriculture, thriving watersheds, and resilient planning. Of course, there's some overlap between those 4 topics, of course, but the work of landscape transformation as a means to reduce outdoor municipal water use is mainly part of the vibrant communities focus, and the water plan really provides this direction on supporting these efforts and has a connection to the DIY guide, which I will speak more to on the next slide. But CWCB also has these robust grant programs. I manage the state's turf replacement grant program, which launched in 2023 and provides funding to eligible entities such as local governments, water utilities, 501c3 nonprofit organizations that work in water or in the landscape space. So this grant program does not provide funding directly to residents or property owners, but it does provide financial support to local entities to start up or advance these voluntary turf programs that residents can potentially take advantage of. So these efforts can be in the form of local rebates or incentives, or they can be projects that target specific locations for landscape transformation. So the funding for the turf replacement grant program is expected to be exhausted after our latest application round. However, we have other grant options that are available through our water plan grants just to help support these collaborative and multi-beneficial water conservation programs. Next slide, please. The Colorado Water Plan itself includes these 50 agency actions that are across those 4 main focus areas that I mentioned, and it really provides more context for the inspiration and the motivation for this DIY guide. And so one of the agency actions, which is 1.7 of the water plan, calls for identifying turf replacement options that support transformative landscape change. This action also defines what transformative landscape change is, and it's just really this concept that promotes using less water-intensive plants that incorporates high-efficiency irrigation methods to maintain these vibrant landscapes in our communities across Colorado. So the goal of all of this is not to eliminate green spaces that provide value and need supplemental irrigation. We don't want to just eliminate green spaces just to save water. But it's really all about increasing irrigation efficiency for desired vegetation and to shift to vegetation with decreased watering requirements in places where it's appropriate and it can be sustained. So the DIY guide is part of that agency action charge. There was also a 2023 Urban Landscape Conservation Task Force that also set the stage for the creation of this guide. That was a task force Governor Polis initiative, and he charged CWCB with bringing together 21 thought leaders from across Colorado to explore all things landscape change. So Denver Water and Resource Central were also part of that task force, which culminated in a final report with consensus recommendations in January 2024. One of those final recommendations was to develop a step-by-step guide to implement best practices for turf installation and removal that serves this communication tool and help improve knowledge and accessibility to creating and managing these lower water use landscapes. So because of all these state level directives and recommendations, the goal of this effort was to collaborate on the centralized and really comprehensive document to help meet residents where they are and just create a tool for engagement, education, and really tangible change that people can take advantage of. Next slide, please. All of these documents and initiatives that I've mentioned are publicly available resources that we have housed on Engage CWCB. There is a QR code on this page, and I will drop a link in the chat as well. This page also provides a State of the Science report, which was part of Agency Action 1.7. That report was released last week. It looks at all things landscape transformation again, and is really looking at it in this holistic manner that isn't just focused on water savings, and really trying to understand the impacts of these efforts, just so that we can better plan ahead and prioritize what we're looking at for change. There are also companion reports on that page that CWCB contracted with varying subject matter experts just to help support the report. They're also all linked throughout there. Of course, the DIY guide is listed on this page. There's also a 2023 and 2024 exploratory economic turf analysis, and then other important and relevant links, like including the turf replacement grant program landing page itself, the Colorado Water Plan grants, and a 2022 Colorado Landscape Summit. And with all of that, I will pass it over to Bea with Denver Water.
Thanks, Jenna. I'm Bea Stratton. I am the Landscape Transformation Program Manager at Denver Water, and I work in our Conservation and Efficiency Department. And I wanted to give you a little background on Denver Water and kind of the path that led us to standing up a more robust landscape transformation program and spending the time and effort on this DIY guide. First and foremost, I think this is kind of a fun fact. Denver Water is the largest and oldest utility in Colorado. So we were established in 1918, and we do not get any funding from taxes. We are a public agency, and we get all of our funds from ratepayer dollars and tap fees. We serve 1.5 million people throughout the Denver metro area and surrounding suburbs. So our service area is quite large. You can go ahead and change or go to the next slide. So our landscape transformation program really initiated and came out of this call for Colorado River users to come up with a plan for reducing what they take from the Colorado River. And this was really culminated in a memorandum of understanding that was signed by a number of municipalities and utilities throughout the Colorado River Basin that set aside some goals. And one of the main goals that came out of this was reducing non-functional turf grass by 30%. I want to define non-functional. We are not talking about valuable functional spaces in our communities. We're not talking about parks. We're not talking about your lawns. We're more talking about places that are really only being stood on to be mowed, but we're still heavily irrigating them and keeping them planted with Kentucky bluegrass. So this is a great opportunity for water conservation if we just rethink how we are structuring our landscapes and our public spaces. Good examples of this of non-functional turf are big swaths of Kentucky bluegrass and medians. For instance, like when you're driving down Quebec, you can see huge medians that some of them have been converted. We've partnered with Parks and Rec on that. And, you know, just really focusing on areas that we can put functional landscapes in that are intended for our service area. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Something that we're doing, you know, in the midst of kind of reevaluating how we are standing up this program is we're doing an internal audit. We are changing our language. If you didn't know, Denver Water is kind of the king of the term xeriscape. We coined the term in the 1980s, and it's really done well. It's been adopted internationally. We think it did a lot of great work for us as far as just getting people on board and understanding what a low water landscape is. But as we look around our service area, we're seeing that some of our customers are interpreting xeriscape to literally mean zero-scape. And that's not what we intended. We think that the appropriate landscapes for the Denver area and for Colorado largely are diverse, they're textural, and they provide multiple benefits to our communities. So when you look at this photo on the left, it's beautiful, it's tidy, but there's not a lot of diversity in this photo. We've got lots of rock, and we think this is kind of more of that zero-scape ideology. And the photo on the right, while I know this is like kind of yard goals for everyone and not a practical landscape, we think it's a good illustration of what we mean by Coloradoscape. That photo is beautiful. It's got lots of texture, lots of color, plants everywhere. It's going to attract tons of pollinators, increase soil health, and it's absolutely beautiful. So xeriscape isn't totally dead to us, but I think we're making the move to Coloradoscape because we think it more fully encompasses what we mean when we were trying to tell people about the landscapes that we're encouraging in our service area. Next slide. Another thing we're doing in line with an internal audit is that we're looking at our own properties. So Denver Water owns tons of properties throughout the Denver metro area, some up in the mountains, and we have our own non-functional turf grass. So we are learning by doing and testing different methodologies, learning from the process, creating case studies, and kind of reporting out on what's happening and trying different methods on each site. This is the very first landscape transformation that I managed, and I thought it was really good to mention in this webinar because we applied for a grant from CWCB and Resource Central. So this was the Transformative Landscape Change Challenge grant, and this is at our Einfeld pump station near DU on the corner of University and Bucktel. And you can see on this photo on the left, this is right after we put the plants in the ground, but essentially this grant included turf removal from Resource Central. So Resource Central folks came and removed 1,250 square feet of turf, and then they left us with just under 400 low water plants. So essentially this is a garden in a box on steroids because it's huge. And I'm so proud of it. And phase 2 of this project, you can see kind of the left side of that first photo, that was all Kentucky bluegrass, and we removed it and seeded it with a native grass stand. So this is a mixture of low water plants, native grass, and then in the coming years, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure is going to do a capital improvement project along Bucktail, and we'll get a rain garden on this site as well. So I think this will be a really great demonstration site for anyone interested in seeing the different types of landscapes that we could use when we're talking about Coloradoscaping. And then this is kind of my condensed version of Sleep, Creep, and Leap, which you'll see in a lot of Resource Central programming and messaging. So June 2024, little babies go in the ground. I have to say, I was so surprised and so excited at immediately seeing pollinator activity, like while the plants were still in their pots, sitting there waiting to be planted. It was so cool. In May of 2024, almost a year later, you can see those beautiful blooms. The plants are super happy. They're growing. I guess this is the creep stage, but it was like a little faster than I thought. They got bigger faster than I thought they would. And then in September of 2024, of course, we don't see as many blooms because we're going into fall, but some of those plants are 3 and 4 times bigger than what we saw in May. So super proud of this project. So thankful to CWCB and Resource Central for the opportunity to have a demonstration garden at one of our pump stations. And you can go to the next slide. So beyond this kind of internal audit for ourselves and kind of learning by doing, we know that our residential customers are really excited to conserve water through their landscapes as well. And we know that we need to build robust programming to support our customers in kind of continuing the journey and feeling empowered to transform their landscapes. I would be remiss if I did not just give a huge shout out to Resource Central right now. We rely so heavily on them for our outdoor water conservation programming. And, you know, if we didn't have them, I think our customers would suffer, quite honestly. Allie's going to get into a lot of the details about these programs, but I did want to highlight a few of the new programs we're participating in that Denver Water traditionally hasn't. Last year was the first year that we offered any support on turf removal. And this is really a point of pride for me. When I was in grad school, before I worked for Denver Water, I was researching turf incentive programs. This was kind of has been a passion project for me for a long time. And I was very disappointed in the middle of my own lawn conversion, looking at what other utilities were offering and seeing that Denver Water didn't offer any support on turf removal. So it's kind of been my personal vendetta to get some turf removal support for our customers. This year, if you apply, you'll get up to $750 of support from Denver Water if you get through the program and the application process. Another thing that we're doing with Resource Central is the HOA pilot program. There's a huge gap in support for our HOA customers. This is a great opportunity to help transform large areas of Kentucky bluegrass. So we're excited that Resource Central is lending their expertise and kind of hand-holding and guiding our HOA partners through the entire planning process and getting them ready for implementation. And then lastly, we've never offered Waterwise yard webinars through Resource Central before. So we've got 2 coming up. We're doing one in May that is all about turf removal and another in July that is focused on compost. So if you're interested in those topics, go to Resource Central and sign up. We're really excited to sponsor those. And then lastly, as a part of our robust programming, I started a free native grass seed program last year, and this was inspired by Colorado Springs Utilities. Catherine Moravec is kind of one of my mentors, and she's always doing great things down in Colorado Springs. And so I got some notes from her and decided to replicate the program for Denver Water customers. We're giving 500 square feet of free native grass seed, a mix of buffalo grass and blue grama grass, to customers who are interested and have appropriate projects. And all you have to do is email nativegrass@denverwater.org. You can request a bag. One of our staff members will send you a form that you need to fill out, and you just give us some information about your project. We'll make sure that it's suitable for the seed, and then you can coordinate a pickup at Denver Water. If you don't want to do that, we will be set up at all of the Garden in a Box pickups with one of these cool Denver Water setups this year, and you can grab a bag of seed, talk to us in person, get some free Denver Water gardening gloves, and be on your way with your seed and your garden in a box, which sounds like a pretty good day to me. So I'm going to pass it to Allie and let her dig into the details on Resource Central programming.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, Bea. I myself have one of the pairs of free Denver Water gardening gloves, and I had them on today. So it's great. Started my weeding for the first time today, so that was exciting. But yeah, so thanks again. I am Allie again. So I primarily work on the Garden in a Box program with Resource Central, mostly helping put our collection of gardens and plants together with local landscape designers and nurseries, along with coordinating the logistics of our pickup events that Bea just mentioned. And then more recently, I've taken on expanding our educational resources, not just for Garden in a Box, but also all of our water conservation programs. And so that's kind of why I've got plugged into this project with the DIY guide. And so to move into an intro of Resource Central more broadly, some of you may know this, but always a good reminder because we've got a lot going on. So we support individual conservation actions that ultimately lead to community-wide efforts in 3 main branches. So we're here, of course, to talk about water conservation. I'll spend the most time on that. But before that, wanted to kind of talk about our other 2 programs. The first of which is waste diversion through our materials reuse facility in Boulder. If you have not been, I highly recommend checking it out. I live in Fort Collins, and I try and trek down to Boulder to make it just for the reuse facility. And so It's a really great place if you're starting, say you've got a kind of construction project going on, you maybe want to get rid of your countertops, and so you can donate things like sinks, countertops, cabinetry, but then of course you can also shop there for kind of filling in your own, future kind of house project, construction project with some reused materials. So it's a really great, it's really fun. We've got some kind of public art going on there as well. We've got some garden in a box plants there. So it's worth the trip for sure, even if you don't live in Boulder. And so secondly, through energy conservation, that happens through our Renew Our Schools program. So that's a program where students are empowered to learn about conservation, specifically energy conservation, by participating in an energy saving competition across multiple school districts and now states as well. So it's really neat. Students kind of get into an environmental group. They learn about energy consumption. They install an e-gauge in their school to track the school's energy. And then when they know how much they're using, they try and kind of make some fixes to bring that energy down. And then the school that ends up saving the most energy wins the competition, which is really exciting. So they win a prize, and then also, of course, the bragging rights, which is important, probably more important than the prize. And so lastly, of course, water conservation, which we're going to be talking more about kind of on this coming slide. But so all in all, in our nearly 50 years, we've helped 1 million people save water, conserve energy, and divert waste from landfills. So exciting milestone. We've got our 50 years coming up next year here. So yeah, excited to kind of keep going and keep kind of working on these energy or conservation goals. And so to dig into our water conservation programs a little bit more, thanks to B for kind of starting us and kicking us off on these kind of overviews of the programs. But starting with Garden in a Box, so it's a program that's been around for 20 years. It started in 2003. And through the program, it creates and sells professionally designed Waterwise garden kits that make starting a sustainable landscaping journey as easy as possible. So it was really meant to be, here today we're focused on education around kind of completing these projects. Garden in a Box is a really cool program because it also gives you something in hand to actually go get started. I am definitely guilty of kind of going down rabbit holes of learning something and then maybe sometimes putting off actually doing it. So Garden in a Box is the way to, really get started and start digging in the ground. And so gardens are on sale on our website to purchase now. Some are already sold out, you'll see. So if you're interested, definitely recommend visiting the website soon. But this is part of our spring season sale. And in that timeline, gardens are available for pickup in May and June. And then we will have another season starting again in mid-June for purchase. And those are going to be available for pickup in late August and September. So when you purchase a Garden in a Box, you receive anywhere from 15 to 30 Waterwise, often native plants, a plant by number map to help plant them, which is kind of the kind of central component of a Garden in a Box. In addition to getting those plants, you know how to plant them, how the designer that put the plant list together kind of intended them to be planted together, and then tips as well on how to plant, when to water, and then some seasonal maintenance tips as well for the specific plants that you've got in your garden. So it's an amazing program. I mentioned I was weeding today. It was around some from Garden in a Box that I planted last year, and I'm also purchasing more this spring. So I also cannot stay away from the program. And so then our next up, lawn replacement. So this is our newest water conservation program. And it was really created, with this idea in mind that we're trying to make conservation as easy as possible. And hearing from Garden in a Box customers that they were interested in participating, but the idea of removing their lawn was a really huge hurdle that they had to overcome and was often even stopping folks from proceeding and actually going forward with their project. And so we ran a pilot program. We figured out how best to kind of offer this program. It started with a pretty low number of participants kind of walking through the whole process very step by step. And then we realized, again, it really was just the fact that we need folks running sod cutters on conservation crews, we call them, kind of going out to people's yards and actually getting rid of the grass. So that program has been running since 2021, I believe, in the way that it kind of is running right now. And it's really becoming really popular, kind of a really, again, I've thought about this a lot. I just need to get the grass out of the way. And then with this blank slate, I can really kind of get creative and get started on these projects. So that's been a really exciting program more recently. And then next up also is our Slow the Flow program that is celebrating its 20th year this year, and it offers free sprinkler evaluations to help find inefficiencies and provide a custom watering schedule to homeowners and HOAs. And so this is a really great program, knowing that part of xeriscaping or Coloradoscaping, one of the core tenets of it is to not eliminate all of your grass, but to be intentional on what grass you are keeping. And if you are keeping any grass, that you're watering it efficiently. So we're not here to tell you to get rid of all your grass at all. But if you are going to keep that, to play on, for your dogs to run around on, to Slow the Flow is around to kind of help make sure that you're doing it, again, as efficiently as possible and not wasting any water on a broken head, sprinkler head or something like that. Whenever I look at the stats of this program, I'm pretty amazed. I think it's something like 96 or 98% of houses that they go to do have inefficiencies in the terms of a broken head or like a tilted sprinkler head. So they're all around. You definitely might not know that your kind of sprinkler system is operating a little bit inefficiently. And so the Flow is there to let you know and kind of help make sure that you're doing that properly. So it's a really great program as well. And then finally, of course, our longest running water conservation program are these Waterwise yard seminars. They used to be in person, and now we are kind of moved to webinars while we're all here tonight. But it's become the most kind of accessible way to really dive into a wide variety of topics from professionals. So it's a really great program and really kind of, a reason that's how our water conservation kind of programs were started was just from an education standpoint. So we're really committed to kind of continuing that where we can. And so that kind of is a perfect segue into our latest initiative, which is called waterwiseyards.org. And this started at first as what we call an inspiration hub to help residents who are interested in looking to do a Waterwise kind of project to go from grass to Waterwise garden, a place where people can actually look to see what types of yards people are converting to. So you can only walk around your one neighborhood so often, and you might not have a ton of examples of Waterwise yards you can see in your immediate neighborhood. And so this website is supposed to kind of open up, the whole state of Colorado, see what other Coloradans are doing, and also kind of fill that kind of piece of finding real photos of what these projects look like. And so it's a place where you can filter in this inspiration hub. You can filter by size, by location, by cost of the project. Homeowners will list all that information, write a blurb about what they what materials they use for their project, kind of hurdles they came across, what they may wish they did differently, all while also submitting before and after photos. So I highly recommend looking at those. It's a great way to kind of realize what you do like and also maybe what you don't like. So it's a really great spot to kind of get started there. And then last up, new to this website, waterwiseyards.org, is actually kind of the mode at which that got us thinking about joining the initiative to create a DIY guide, was through a grant from CWCB. We were awarded kind of this grant to flush out a resources hub. So a place, again, to kind of summarize all of this information. There's so much information out there about how to complete these projects. And we wanted to create a website specifically that was brief, kind of interactive, had lots of photos, but did walk through the process of completing a Waterwise project in your own kind of home landscape. So kind of just wanted to make it easy to use and visually appealing as well. So you can use those resources to answer specific questions like what mulch should I use for my new garden? Or of course, start from the beginning and be led through the basic steps of what our recommendations are for a project. So it might sound familiar to what this DIY guide is. It very much is. And that's kind of why we were interested in joining this effort to kind of start with the kind of visually appealing, way more kind of not detailed, the opposite of detailed, kind of just summary of what to do with recommendations, and then to really kind of go do a deep dive kind of work on this DIY guide. So highly recommend checking out waterwiseyards.org. And with that, we can now focus on the main event here. So our DIY guide. So what exactly is this guide? You can see here a screenshot of the cover page. And so after all of this, kind of why we wanted to create something like this, we were looking to create a residential specific kind of guide that consolidates all of the information that's out there in an easy to follow, but also very intentionally detailed format. So we wanted to make sure that there you can kind of walk through the whole every step of the project. You also, because it is longer, you'll be able to kind of control find for certain words. And we really wanted to kind of put as much as we could into this guide so that you didn't have to look elsewhere to answer any questions that you had. And so because it can be hard to find that information, that's why we wanted to come together in this kind of collaborative partnership to create this, to kind of have as many unique perspectives on it as possible to really make it as useful for as many people as possible. And we focus specifically on residential properties with this knowledge that these projects, if you were to hire a landscape professional, can be pretty expensive to do a full project that is just completely, trusted in the hands of professionals. That is a lot of money. And so this is really geared towards the DIYers out there that want to complete some or all of the project on their own. So it's cool too that it's not necessarily instructions on the exact one way to complete this project. It offers guidelines that can help choose what's right for you. For example, the Resource Central lawn removal program, using that option is definitely kind of in the scope of using this guide. You can then kind of use the professionals for that piece and then move on to figuring out the rest of the project on your own with this guide. And then lastly, most importantly, it is free and intended to be shared. That was kind of the most important thing. We all knew that when we went into creating this, that we wanted to kind of make sure that it's usable for everyone. And again, kind of focused on keeping that cost down. And so it is free. You've already seen the link to it, and that will stay that way. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Jenna now.
Thanks, Allie. So we just want to provide some insight into how this guide was created. As Allie mentioned earlier, this process started over a year ago when Denver Water, Resource Central, and CWCB came together to start discussing the possibility of creating this resource. So when we decided to move forward, we started by gathering nearly 100 different resources to pull from, cataloged them by category that span the many components of DIY landscape change. And through this process, we certainly didn't reinvent the wheel. Rather, we were really trying to build on the wealth of existing resources and received feedback from informed stakeholders and subject matter experts. We contracted with Brown and Caldwell to do the extraordinarily heavy lift of pulling all of that information together to create the language of the guide. I think it's safe to say that without Brown and Caldwell's involvement, this project would have taken infinitely longer to produce and publish, and we are just all very grateful for the work that they did to bring this guide to life. The guide is intentionally written in a friendly and approachable way and is really meant to be this trusted companion throughout the whole process. So from the start of working and starting to develop all of this, we knew that we wanted this guide to be collaborative. We wanted to involve more stakeholders to improve it, ensure that it was a resource that people could actually adopt and use. So we convened a stakeholder meeting in August of 2024, which included interested parties who could adopt the guide and help get it to their residents. So these initial stakeholders were expanded to include experts, including Colorado State University Extension, the Denver Botanic Gardens, and Denver Parks and Recreation. All of these parties received a draft and provided very, very helpful comments, which we incorporated into the guide where it made sense before its final design. So if any of the stakeholders are on this meeting, big thank you to you. Much appreciated with all that feedback and input. So we also received really incredible insight from the Colorado State Forest Service just to ensure that there's information and direction throughout about protecting tree health when engaging in landscape change. The guide also went through an extensive ADA compliance check and has already been endorsed by Yampa Valley Sustainability Council, Colorado State University Extension, Grand Junction Utilities, Denver Parks and Rec, and Colorado Springs Utilities. So last week, I presented at the CWCB board meeting to just release this guide, get it out, so it's now published and ready for adoption and use. And we'll provide the link again in the chat in case anyone jumped on late. So now that you have all that background, we'll go more into what the guide actually looks like. So next slide, please. So there is a before you start page that provides some important context for the reader and whoever's using the guide. We wanted to create a helpful document to really guide folks through the manual process, but we also recognize that some parts of landscape change may be out of the scope of expertise for those that are using the guide. So when in doubt, during any steps of the process, the guide really advises consulting with experts. This can mean, checking with and consulting with landscape professionals, arborists, your local municipality or community, or your water utility. This is a statewide resource, and any more regional specific information may be necessary to also seek out. So anyone who is adopting this guide locally has received guidance on how they can include additional regional resources and information. This can include plant recommendations and planting methods. It can be very dependent on where you are. There's also, of course, local watering schedules and rules that should be followed. There's local rebates and incentives potentially available. So there also may be, educational tools or engagements that are happening on that local scale that folks can take advantage of. That including all of that just wouldn't have made sense for a statewide guide. It's already long. It would have been way longer if we'd included everything that's available in all the communities. So the guide really encourages readers to look into all of those possibilities in their community. The guide is definitely not a substitute for any legal advice or guidance. So users are encouraged to look into local codes, local regulations before embarking on landscape change, and also just throughout the process, just to make sure that you're in compliance with all of your local and then also state rules and regulations. The guide definitely reminds you that it's okay to not know something. That's why it's there, and really make sure to provide support for just seeking out this additional information as you go along. Next slide, please. There are quite a few call-out boxes and reminders throughout the guide that are purposely designed to catch your eye. The more pressing information is provided on the left side. I don't know if this is mirrored. Well, I think it's on the left side of what you're seeing, in that kind of reddish, pinkish, and more golden color, and also include icons just to let you know that you should contact someone or look into something further when in doubt. So these examples, includes calling before you dig, just to understand what's underground before you understand by digging and piercing something with a shovel. Also, tips or reminders to consult a professional about any irrigation issues or irregularities that you don't think you can handle on your own. And then caution, around anything with mature trees. So these colors and these icons are really meant as flags to ensure that you're safely working in your landscape and in compliance with these local and or state rules and regulations. And just to remind you over and over that there are resources and additional support that's available. So based on your skills and experience in landscape change, you will know best when you need to consult outside guidance, but we just wanted to make sure that those reminders are peppered throughout and very, very obvious. There are also call-out boxes in that kind of light blue and darker green color that are extra tips and information that can be helpful throughout the process. So these 2 pages on, I think the right, are examples of what these look like in the guide. On that first page, fire safety and tree protection information are very clearly highlighted. And then on that second page, the call-out boxes are drawing attention to what local irrigation components, or I'm sorry, local irrigation programs may be available, and then the components of an efficient irrigation system. So you'll find all of these throughout the entire guide. Next slide, please. So after the introductions and the background information, the guide itself is divided into 6 sections based on Waterwise and Xeriscape principles, with a project checklist at the end. So I will walk you through some highlights of the first 2 sections, and Allie will talk about the soil and mulch considerations in planting, and then B will give you insights on the watering and maintenance sections. Next slide, please. Section 1 is by far the longest section, which is by design, because the planning and the designing component is foundational for the success of the overall project, right? So you're really laying the groundwork and preparing for the project here. That takes time. So it is a robust section, and it is primarily for prepping, and includes the important steps that help the user envision their new landscape. It highlights common mistakes that are made when embarking on DIY landscape design, and offers tips to avoid these pitfalls. There is insight on doing a self-landscape assessment to determine the best course of action. There's a sample plant list that is certainly not intended to be comprehensive. It's not region specific. It's more just to provide guidance on what to look for when you're picking out your plant palette and you're planning your space. The guide also provides insight into level setting expectations. Landscape change can be a long process. It takes dedication. It's not something that just magically happens overnight. Those of you who have changed a landscape know that for sure. And we just really wanted to be realistic about what this looks like up front, so that people can approach their projects well informed and can plan ahead and not be totally surprised at the length and just all the work that goes into the process. Next slide, please. So we also wanted to include information for anyone who's maybe not ready to take on, a full landscape change project or an incremental one, but they're still interested in saving water and reducing their irrigation use. So proper irrigation is essential and integral to any healthy landscape, and there are irrigation considerations provided for different landscape types. We call out water sense appliances and fixtures to help increase efficiency. We also offer alternative ways to reduce outdoor water use and just ensure that your irrigation systems are efficient and functional and applying the appropriate and correct amount of water that different plants need. We also have reminders or maybe reassurance that these projects can be incremental. You don't have to take on a massive project. You don't have to do everything all at once. And the guide can be applied no matter what the scale, what the scope is. And it's really encouraging that this work be incremental, just to avoid taking on too much and losing steam throughout the process. There are reminders to take your time. Landscape change is not a race. I personally always love this advice in any context of life, and probably need it more in general for everything. So it's just, helping you along this process and making sure, that we're not setting these expectations of something is just going to occur. It's really being realistic about the work that goes into all of this and the timeline. Next slide, please. So section 2, you've gotten through the planning process. Congratulations. This section is all about turf removal, which of course only applies to projects that are removing turf. So if this doesn't apply, this section is something that will be less relevant, of course, but may be helpful for another project. There is a comprehensive look at removal methods and tips, and how to choose the one that works best for you and your project, and the process length, your preferences, all of that. There are big reminders here again about tree protection, because turf removal if it's done without tree considerations, can inadvertently be incredibly damaging to tree health. These effects can be brought on by the damage to the feeder roots and other stressors. These impacts may not be known and realized for a few years, so it's really important to think about this and remove turf responsibly, just to ensure the protection of your existing trees in the landscape. And although proper chemical application is outside the scope of this guide, this guide is not advocating for chemical use. We do include precautions and light guidance on how to learn about the recommended use and application if you think that is something that you need to include in your landscape project. And with that, I will pass it over to Allie to talk about the section 3.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Jenna. Alrighty, so yeah, section 3 is on soil and mulch. And so kind of it starts out with a brief, not too much, but a nice intro into soil characteristics to help understand kind of why certain recommendations for amendments and mulch are made. So definitely acknowledging, it can sound kind of crazy that a guide would go into something so complex as soil composition. There's a lot that goes into it. But I think it's nice that it starts off this way as a reminder, that soil is alive. And so if you really do want to dig into maybe why you're having trouble with your landscape, kind of going back to the foundation of your soil can be a great way to kind of get some questions answered. And so I think the coolest part too is that, we do point to the fact that CSU Extension, if you do want to learn a lot more and really, again, dive right into soil and microbes and everything that goes on in there, they have their own soil tests that you can have done on your soil. So you can kind of learn more about the soil composition that you're working with. Again, definitely not required. You can kind of see here, it's in this yellow call out box to say, opt in if you do want to learn more. Of course, you can go ahead and skip the sections on soil composition if you wanted to. But say down the line you did want to learn more, you can kind of come back to that beginning, which is really great. And then next, the chapter discusses soil amendments, which are something that you mix into the soil to help improve it for the specific plants that you're growing. So you might think of like an organic compost for something like a veggie garden. Sometimes it's used in this Waterwise landscaping, but we know here in Colorado, we've got a lot of pretty heavy clay soils. And so amendment could also be an inorganic amendment as well. So kind of like a small rock mulch. And so it goes over all of those options. So both organic and inorganic amendments, as well as organic and inorganic mulch types. So that difference just being mulch is what's going to go on top of the garden that you've planted. And it includes pros and cons of each type to really help you decide what will work best for you. And then it ends with the important topic of landscape fabric, whether or not to use it, what we recommend. A little bit of a spoiler is that it's mostly not recommended, but you can learn more if you kind of look at the guide there. And then next up is section 4, and that is planting. So first up, again, the important call out, we say it here as we also say it in the beginning, that it's important to locate the utilities that you have when you're doing any sort of digging. So calling 811. I think also what's a super valuable part in here are the images of what a root bound plant would look like versus a healthy one, to help kind of set yourself up for success and know kind of how to remedy that root bound problem if needed, because it can be something that can be harmful to your plants, but is actually super easy to solve. So another great kind of fact of this guide is that it has some really great visuals, and that's one of them that I think kind of paints it in a really clear way. And then with inspiration from our very own garden in a box planting tips, we've got steps on how to plant a plant, starting, with what you're looking for in the soil, how to get started digging, and then also from covering it up and watering the new plant. So kind of dives deep into that. And then lastly, B also mentioned this kind of idea of they sleep, they creep, they leap. This has an important kind of expectation setting and information about what to expect from your plants in the first few years when they're establishing. So they, do take some time to establish, especially if you're planting in the fall. They're kind of focused on growing their roots down. They might not be the most showy that you want them to be that first season, but with a little bit of patience, that will pay off. And this guide kind of talks about that in this section here as well, with some really helpful photos. Great. And so with that, I'll pass it back to B.
Thanks, Allie. So section 5 is all about watering, and it really starts with some detailed information on evaluating your irrigation system. It's really good at the beginning of the season to kind of take a walk through your landscape and try to identify any broken heads, leaks that need repair, or just like if your head gets turned, over the season, or if you've had any equipment on your property. I came out last year after the winter, and like one of my irrigation heads was like spraying my fence. So just having eyes on any changes in your existing system. It also focuses on increasing efficiency, and you can do this through planning. I really like my favorite thing in this section, which really isn't pictured in the first 2 pages, but there's an example landscape with a veggie bed, a tree section, a medium, a low water section, and a native grass area. And it just really illustrates the power and benefit to zoning out and planting plants with similar water requirements in the same zone. That way, when you go to lay out your irrigation system, you've got the same water going to plants that have the same water requirements. So it really helps to think of things in a compartmentalized way, and seeing it kind of planned out in a schematic, I thought was a really cool part of this section. I think the other important thing about watering and just thinking about irrigation is knowing when to call a professional. I think that's one of the big takeaways across the entire guide, is just knowing we love DIY, but knowing when it's a little beyond our area of expertise, and irrigation is one of those things. There are definitely videos and resources to convert to drip and do small things within the landscape. But if you've got a big issue, I would highly encourage you to call a professional. You can go to the next slide. So the next section is maintenance, and much to my chagrin, the biggest piece of this is just weeding. You got to stay on top of your weeds, and if you have bindweed like I do, it's poking out and it's ready to go. It was like not there last week, and now my yard is like got little sprouts everywhere. One thing I really love about this section is this image of looking at a Colorado scape through all seasons. I think it's really important to kind of understand what your landscape is going to look like throughout the year. I also think it's really powerful to just be able to accept what that landscape is going to look like in the winter. And I have a garden in a box in my front yard. I have several different types of ornamental grasses, and I love them in the winter. You know, on a gray day where there's not much going on, you don't see any blooms, I can look out and I see this beautiful golden ornamental grass standing up, still looking great in the middle of January. So I think that's kind of one of the many benefits to a Colorado scape, is the seasonal interest that it provides, but also just really understanding maintenance throughout the seasons. Obviously you're going to stay on top of weeding in spring, summer, and fall. You're not really worried about that in the winter. In the spring, after the last frost, sorry, you're going to clean up your debris. You're going to do that walk through and inspect your irrigation system. You can start pruning and cutting back your grasses. In the summer, you just got to stay on top of those weeds and deadhead. If you get a spike in your irrigation bill, it might be a sign that there's a leak or a break somewhere. So keeping an eye, if something looks a little weird on your bill, it's time to look at your system. In the fall, I used to work in landscaping, and we did these big fall cleanups. We left landscapes looking pristine and clean in fall, and that's not really beneficial to our native bees and insects. So I just want to make a plug to, remove any of your like dead and dying debris. But if you have leaf stems standing up on your yarrow, leave it there through the winter. Let the leaves that have collected around the bases of your plants stay. It actually helps to kind of insulate that plant and gives it a little more warmth throughout the season. And it also provides benefit for our ground nesting bees and other pollinators and insects that need that coverage to kind of overwinter. So that's my plug there. It doesn't need to be tidy going into the winter. Save your cleanup for spring. And then in winter, if you have a ton of shade trees on your property and lots of perennials, you don't need to water like it's July, but if we go through a dry spell and haven't seen snow in a long time, those trees need a drink. So just keep an eye on your plants and kind of keep track of when the last time it snowed and how sunny it's been. And even though it's February, you might need to get out there with some water. You can go to the next slide. So the last section of the guide is the DIY turf grass replacement checklist. And it's a few pages that basically is a high-level checklist of all the main takeaways from each section of the guide in order of the chapters. I think it's a really great way to kind of encompass those main takeaways. And if you don't feel like deep diving into every section, print out this checklist and just kind of go through. If you don't understand something, dig into the guide for more clarity. But it's just a really good way to organize your thoughts ahead of the season. We're at a really good time right now for planning a landscape transformation. And the idea is to just help keep yourself organized, make sure you're checking off the right boxes and not forgetting anything important. And another plug here, as I said, we all love DIY. There are moments where the level of expertise is above just the standard layperson. You need to call before you dig. Don't just start sticking shovels a couple feet in the ground. You might hit something that will cost a lot of money to fix. If you're using a sod cutter around the base of a large established tree, you're going to want to consult with a certified arborist. You want to make sure that you're following any guidelines about Firewise plantings and making sure you're obeying defensible space rules, and then also just make sure you're in compliance with local rules and ordinances. And I think we all know if we live in an HOA, you have to listen to the HOA gods. So you got to get approvals if your landscape isn't looking like the tidy landscape that everyone expects within an HOA. So if you're doing something that's a little outside of the box, you probably got to go get some approval for it. Yeah, so you can go to the next slide. So what's next? We have worked really hard to make this guide exciting, visually pleasing, accessible, easy, approachable. But we're working, there are a couple more steps for accessibility. Jenna worked extremely hard to make this ADA accessible. I'm really excited that we have an ADA compliant product out the gate. Thank you for all that work, Jenna. But we are also kind of in phase 2 working on a fully translated Spanish version of this guide that will be available this summer. So really excited to announce that. Please keep your eyes out. CWCB will have it on the website as soon as it's available. And then Denver Water has a really robust media team, and we're working on videos to accompany each chapter. So on the Denver Water landing page for the DIY guide, which isn't up yet, but will be in the next couple of weeks, there'll be a YouTube playlist with videos that accompany some of the chapters. We're going to keep adding to the guide or keep adding to the video Rolodex, but we encourage any partner utilities, anyone adopting a guide throughout the state, please share our videos. You can put them on your website. They're for everyone. It's meant to be shared. It's not just for Denver Water customers. This is the whole point of this is collaboration, water conservation, and making a better, more climate resilient Colorado. And then finally, this is our first time presenting the guide. It was just released last week, but we think we'll be presenting the guide throughout the year at different conferences. We're really proud of it. And if you or your organization feels like there's a good fit for this guide to be presented at an event, just reach out to one of us and we will see if we can make it happen. And with that being said, thank you so much for being here. I know this was a lot to take in. We are so proud of this guide. We hope that it is useful for you. And we've been trying to keep up with questions in the Q&A, but feel free to add more in there. There was one for clarification I had for you, Allie. We had a question about the recording. Someone was having internet problems. Will it be emailed to everyone, or do they only have access through going to the Resource Central site?
Yes, it will be emailed to everyone. Yeah, so we'll send a follow-up email with the link to the survey and then also the link to the recording.
Okay.
Yeah, keep an eye out for that in the coming days.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I see also one kind of question, but also a call out here, which is really great about the Colorado Native Grass Guide as well. That is a fantastic call out. Thank you to that person. So yeah, this is an organization spearheaded by Colorado Springs Utilities, kind of creating this specifically a guide, but also a corresponding really highly interactive and visually appealing website, all things specifically native grass conversions. So our guide, of course, is kind of more broadly, specifically residential, converting from a kind of grass lawn or just a weedy space to a Waterwise garden. The Colorado Native Grass Guide is all about native grasses. So highly recommend checking that out as well. So thanks to put that there.
That person also was asking about if there are percentages of seed types in the mixes recommended on that site. I don't believe that they go into that level of detail. Typically with like a blue grama buffalo grass mix, which is pretty common for the Front Range, and you see it a lot as kind of an approachable mix for a conversion. It's usually a 70-30 mix. And if you're interested in finding more detail about more diverse mixes, I would suggest going to Pawnee Butte Seed website. That's a Colorado state seed provider, and they have different seed mixes, as well as Western Native Seed. Western Native Seed is also Colorado based, and that is who I order the seed that Denver Water gives away and they have different mixes, and I believe there's like a couple of low grow, Xeriscape. There's like a plains mix. So you can get more diversity in those, and you'll get a little more information by going to those websites.
Awesome, great. And similar to the recorded Zoom question, asking if there's a library of these recorded Zoom meetings. Yes, Resource Central does have a YouTube channel or page, not sure what the exact right word is, but you can find that on YouTube, and all of our recorded webinars are on there as well.
I see another question asking if blue grama is good for a specific space at someone's house. It's hard to answer without really knowing about the space, but what I'll tell you about the mix that we give away is that with buffalo blue grama grass, it really does need full sun, 6 to 8 hours. So it wouldn't be suitable under anywhere with a shade tree. You really want to make sure that it's getting full sun. And if you're planting in a space that has trees, just understanding that there probably wouldn't be full coverage up to the base of the tree. And I think that that's okay too. It kind of depends on your aesthetic preferences. Other things to note are that when you're planting native grass, while it is eventually water-wise, it does take quite a bit of water up front to get it established. And you need to keep it significantly wet through the first couple of weeks until it germinates. So that would mean watering it morning and evening. And if it's through the heat of the summer, which this mix is recommended to be planted June through August, you would sometimes be watering it 3 times a day until germination. So that could be about 2 weeks. You can slowly back off, and then you would eventually get down to much less water than Kentucky bluegrass, about 1/3 of the amount, depending on how green you want it to be.
Great. And yeah, and we can kind of throw them in the chat if we've got the time, but I will also definitely connect with UB to get the names of the suppliers, and also we'll link to the native grass guide in the follow-up email as well. So that will be coming. So thanks for that suggestion there too. And
Got
then
a clover question. I think clover works well in some instances, but it is not as water-wise as a native grass that is native to Colorado. So it's kind of dependent on your landscape, how much water you're willing to use. Yeah. How much foot traffic you're planning on.
see a question here about sheet mulching and feeder roots of trees, and if that will damage that. And so just wanted to say that's a question that is definitely, we talk about tree health and lawn removal a lot in this guide. That was kind of a, like Jenna mentioned, a later addition and a really important one when we kind of got some feedback from the Colorado State Forest Service and also some other kind of tree experts. So I would turn to the information in the guide for sure. And if you have other questions, the tree experts out there, if you have a local kind of tree landscaping company, they'll kind of be the ones to really answer that question the best. But just note that it was very much a kind of intention of the guide to address tree health in these conversions. It's a really important kind of thing to be thinking about. I won't call it a problem because it's an opportunity to also be thinking about the trees as well. So thanks for that question too. Great. Yeah. And I'll just say, obviously, my contact information is here, specifically my email address with Resource Central. If you see on our website, also the garden info at resourcecentral.org email is all over our website as well. If you have any questions about this guide specifically, they'll be directed to me, and I can kind of move out the questions from there. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or feedback on this. And yeah, thank you so much for attending. It looks like we've got a few more questions. Some of them are, I will say, a little bit of above my expertise specifically. But one question, Resource Central, do they remove junipers? That is something we're not a landscaping company. We do kind of singularly remove watered and maintained grass. That was a question as well in terms of why does the grass need to be watered and maintained? And so we do the one thing and the one thing only, and that is kind of removing healthy Kentucky bluegrass. And so if you have more questions about that, again, that's kind of on our lawn removal FAQ page as well about the details of that. But thanks for that question also.
Someone asked, since you don't recommend fabric, do you suggest cardboard under mulch? And I think that's a great alternative. You know, it will biodegrade. You're not going to be pulling little pieces of plastic out when it eventually is breaking down. It will just become part of your soil, and it does help suppress weeds.
Awesome.
Any more?
I know they're kind of slowing down. Yeah. So we'll hang on for a few more seconds here. But yeah, thank you again. I just wanted to say while people are still on here, thank you so much for attending this webinar. We really are so excited. Yeah, huge thank you again to Brown and Caldwell for the help working on this guide. And again, I can't say it enough to CWCB and Denver Water, Jenna and B. It's been so awesome to work with you on creating this guide, and I'm really excited that we're here. So thanks, everyone.
Likewise, yeah. It's been a pleasure working with you both, and I'm excited to have this out in the world. And thanks for the initial feedback, and we look forward to everyone diving in and using the guide.
Yeah,
Thank you.
very exciting.